clamp, squeeze, cut. Oops. Hey, welcome to the shop. As someone who's tried to bridge a few gaps over the years, we've all done it. It's definitely worth taking a little bit of extra time up front to make everything fit right. I'm going to show you how to do that and how to make your projects look like this instead of this. So stay tuned through the end of this video. Now this video is brought to you by Evolution Power Tools. I'll be using their chop saw on their new portable stand throughout the video. And this type of chop saw actually has a toothed blade with these carbide teeth on it, which is different from an abrasive chop saw. It uses more like a cutoff wheel for a grinding type operation. Now I switched to this type of chop saw a few years back after many years using abrasive chop saws. Because the cuts right after you finish, they're cool to the touch, they don't have much of a burr on them, and you're not putting so much dust from that grinding wheel or the cutoff wheel up into the air. Tips we'll share here will help you out no matter what kind of saw you're using. The first thing to do before you make any cut is to be a little more careful with how you set your angle on the fence. Some saws, the actual head will pivot, especially on band saws. On this one, it's the fence that pivots, that's part of the vise. And so when you swing it around, there is a little dial readout that you can use to set your angle. And for a lot of things that's good enough, but if you want to have it really accurate, it's better to use a square or to use a angle variable protractor like this one to be able to set that angle. And whenever you're messing around down by the blade like this, by the way, it's a good idea to unplug this so that you don't accidentally kick it on. Now once you have your angle set right on where you need it, the next thing is to clamp your material in the proper way. So depending on the type of material, there are different ways to clamp this. Let's just run through a few of the most common ones. First of all, if you're cutting flat bar, mount it up and down in the vise, because when you're taking shorter cuts, that actually makes the blade last a little longer in a chop saw like this, rather than trying to cut on the flat edge. As far as round tubing, not much to say here, it just clamps right in. And for square tubing, if it's small, you've got to clamp it right in, but if you have larger square tubing, this particular saw actually has a V-block to mount it up at a 45-degree angle. That just helps the blade to last a little bit longer because you're not making those big, long, flat cuts. And finally, if you're cutting some angle iron, just set it flat on the table with two legs touching the table, sitting up in an inverted V, and that'll work pretty well for you. Now when you get your material in from the steel yard or wherever you buy it from, the ends aren't always very nice, so I think it's a good idea to make your first cut a reference cut. And so I'll go ahead and cut the end off of this square tubing here to make a nice smooth edge. Then after making that reference cut, it's a good opportunity to just throw a protractor on there real quick, double check your angle, make sure everything's set square or whatever angle you have it set at, and that you're good to go with your setup. Now when it comes to actually measuring the length of the tubing that you're going to be cutting or whatever kind of material, there's a few ways you can do this, and the easiest and fastest is just to put your tape measure right on the material, measure over to the blade, and that works really well for a lot of things. But if you want to have a really accurate cut, it's better to just measure and mark. At least that's what I found. And when you measure this out, if you use a marker to mark it like this, you really have a wide band to try to hit, which could be okay, but it's better if you use a scribe like this. You get a really fine line. I'll just use a square to carry that all the way over, and then I can throw it on the saw and line it up. And when you're lining up on the saw, whether it's to a tape measure or to a mark, you have to keep in mind your kerf. Now the kerf is the area where material has been removed by the blade. So I'm just going to line up these carbide teeth so that the edge, the cutting edge, is right in line with that scribe mark. Go ahead and make my cut. Whenever I'm making a cut here with a chop saw, I don't want to use just a ton of force. I'll just come down nice and smooth. And after I cut that, double check the length, and this thing is right on the money. Now if you are making multiple cuts, you can use the first piece that you cut to line up and index the next rather than measuring. So you can set it gently on there. It'll sit up against the edge of those teeth, and that gives you a good length. Now something else to keep in mind, it's really important to support the ends of your material. This base actually has some built-in supports that you can use, and that works really well. Or you can just pick up, these are just some cheap roller supports. You can find these all over the place. to be able to support your material if it's hanging way off of your saw. Now let's apply everything that we've tried here to make some miter cuts. I actually need to build a little frame that's 14 inches by 8 inches for a project I'm working on today. So we'll go ahead and cut that frame out using the tips that we've learned. So the first thing I'll do is set my fence at 45 degrees, double check that with a square, make sure it's good to go, and lock it in. And then I'll make my first reference cut on the end of this rectangular tubing. Now after making the reference cut, I'll just double check the angle with a protractor, and this came out just right. I'll use the tape measure to measure out the length, and whenever I'm measuring for a mitered corner, I go to the outside corners to make my cuts rather than the inside. It's just a lot easier to line up on the saw, so it's worth figuring that out. Now I scribed a line in the same way, and I'm lining up that line that's on the outside edge with the edge of the kerf where my blade will cut. After making that cut, I'll check the length. It's good to go, and so I can use this as a reference piece to be able to cut the other side. And once that's finished, I'll repeat the process with my 8-inch parts that'll go on the other sides, and fit everything together here and double check how it fits, and it's come together really nice. Once again, a big thanks to Evolution Power Tools for partnering with me on this video, and go ahead and check out their tools. There's a discount code down in the description, discount code TimWelds. It'll save you a little bit on their site. And if you enjoyed this video or learned something, let me know by hitting that thumbs up below, and we'll see you next time.